we've got a cool series this month that we're doing. It's called Deep Wells. It's a series on family. And so we've seen kind of very clearly that families have two things to really understand, that blessings run deep and curses run deep. So when you're talking about family or you're doing a family series, the most holistic or the best way to approach it is to recognize and to communicate and to teach on both of those things. What's lovely about God is that He blesses you deeply and He breaks curses in a deep way. So He pulls up roots of bitterness, He breaks strongholds, He breaks up family generational curses. And God's really faithful like that, and He's really good like that. So if a family doesn't get it done in one generation, the next generation could perhaps catch it, or the next, or 1,000 years later, perhaps. But we'll get it at some point if we're with God on this. So we're talking about deep wells because this is the beautiful symbolism we see in the Word that is clear. What God does is deep in our lives. Even if you're not philosophical or you don't see yourself as deep, God does a deep work. It might show up different for you, but nonetheless, He's doing a deep work. So if we're all committed to this simple notion that God is doing a deep work in our lives, and it's just up to us to partner with that work, then we can move on to some of these other places of what does it look like to truly partner with God as He does deep works in our life. So we started in Genesis 26 last week, and we're going to do a little bit more in that space. And Isaac got thrusted into Gerar, the land of Gerar, because of famine. So Isaac gets thrusted into this land, and if you're kind of trying to know what Gerar is, it's not necessarily a friendly land, and actually it means a pilgrimage, dispute, or combat. And I like personally. How many of you guys have a personality where you enjoy combat, you enjoy some kind of argument or some kind of something like this? I know it seems like a bad confession, but I too enjoy it as well. But how many of you guys don't enjoy this or these kinds of people? Yeah, that's fun. So some of us relate differently to disputes, combat, arguments. Sometimes when somebody sees it happening in the room, they want to do everything they possibly can for it to stop happening. Some people make it happen in the room. They're way makers in that way. So some of us might relate differently to it, but there is a way that God leads us to contend. So if you can remove the stigma you have, whether it be positive or negative, or your version of contending, and if we can go to this place of understanding that God teaches us to go deep and allows us to go through a contending season in time, there is a way that God does it, leads us in it, teaches us it. And so we're going to try and learn what it looks like to contend for deep places and to see those places of depth. Because the thing is there's a battle over it, flesh, spirit. There's a battle over generational blessings and curses. So we've got to learn to contend in the deep places and contend for the deep places to be wells of righteousness, wells of purity and wholeness and holiness. We've got to contend for those places. So we'll see in this place what happens with Isaac's story, and we'll learn a lot from it, hopefully. So Isaac goes to Gerar, and Abimelech is the king there, and at that time, he allows Isaac to stay. I'm glossing over what I taught last week. You can catch it on the podcast or video, but Abimelech allows him to stay, and God tells him to stay there rather than going to Egypt in this time of famine, and so Abimelech allows him to stay. Isaac starts crushing it, literally 100-fold on what he's planting, all this kinds of amazing stuff. And we pick up in verse 15 because Isaac's going to get kicked out. And he's going to get kicked out because he's amazing and he's crushing it. And to the envy of the Philistines, he is crushing it. So Genesis 26:15, has anybody ever had this in their life? They did so well, they got kicked out. It's fun. So now the Philistines had stopped and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are much mightier than we." It's a compliment, huh? You got kicked out, but it's also kind of a compliment. And so Isaac departed from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. I want to highlight something before we move on from this, because it can seem basic what just happened, but I want to bring us to a place I think we can relate to, and that Isaac eventually goes on to dig wells or redig wells that Abraham had dug, and also dig new wells. But this started, the impetus for this, the spark for this, was loss of opportunity, loss of land, and rejection. So when you see these variables in your life, it might be a really great indicator it's time for you to go deeper and to dig deeper. So if you see deep and profound rejection happening in your life, you and I can tend to subscribe to some kind of victim mindset at times. Oh, woe is me. Only if Abimelech hadn't kicked me out of Gerar, I would have actually been able to continue to prosper 100-fold. I was crushing it just because envy and jealousy. What is this? So you can sometimes, out of a place of rejection and loss, kick into victim mindset. But I would encourage you to respond like Isaac did, which is to move on and to find new prosperity, new wells. So this is the precipice, though, we see for innovation. This is the precipice we see for us finding new land, new opportunity, new wells. And in that time, wells were really, really symbolic of resource or prosperity. In arid lands like that, wells were really important, and it's actually what communities built their whole thing around, was the well source or the water source. So take a look at this, because I think we can recognize this. You lose a job perhaps, and then all of a sudden you just feel led like you're supposed to change careers. Has anybody ever had this happen? Your well dries up in one area or opportunity dries up here, and you're like, okay, wow, well, what now? And maybe you got fired, maybe you got rejected in anything, maybe your friend group rejects you. I don't know what your rejection looks like in your life, but I do know that we tend to really struggle with rejection when we could see rejection as a propulsion for new opportunity and innovation. So whatever it is, career, vocation, emotionally, relationally, whatever it is that you're experiencing we're not into you anymore, or a no, try and get over the insecurity and the fear of rejection and find new land to dig wells in. Cool? So you get rejected, find a shovel and get ready to dig. Go deeper. Because trials and situations like those, when we're thriving and succeeding, we tend to continue to try and keep it going. So we try and skate along the surface. So crisis hits and it requires us to go deeper in order for us to thrive or survive. And that's a good thing. Because in prosperity, in winning, you don't probe as much on how you can grow than when you lose. The same could be said in sports. When you win, you tend to think like this. Well, let's just do the same thing we did, and then we'll win. And so when you lose, you go introspective. You question what you're doing. You challenge your disciplines. You challenge your tactics, and you shift, and you change, and you adjust. Losing, opportunity loss, leads us into and has a spark of innovation that's important. Allow it to teach you to find new things, dig deeper, challenge yourself, probe where you're living, and really ask questions that are hard, that make you grow and make you relearn what you're doing. You guys with me on this? Whenever you lose, let it spark innovation and new growth. Okay, so in verse 18 it says, "And Isaac dug again the wells of water that had been dug in the days of Abraham, his father, which the Philistines had stopped after the death of Abraham. And he gave them the names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of spring water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, 'The water is ours.' So he called the name of the well Esek, because they contended with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that also. So he called its name Sitnah, and he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehoboth, saying, 'For now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land.'" Okay, let's take a big picture side of this. What happened here to Isaac? He gets kicked out of his place of prosperity, his place of comfort and prosperity. He gets kicked out of that. He has to go to a valley place. And in that valley place, he does what's appropriate and right, and he begins to redig wells. And that redigging effort actually gets him introduced to more conflict and more issues. Which this is so important for us to catch for our own lives. Oftentimes, a major shift happens. It leads to innovation in our first 2, 3, 4, 5 attempts of innovating and finding new resource comes under contention or comes under more loss and robbery. And oftentimes, this will break many people. They'll get rejected. They'll go to innovate. They'll dig, and then it gets taken. It gets quarreled over. They lose a battle. They lose a marketplace ground. And then they're like, okay, well, let's do it again. And then they lose again. And oftentimes people are broken in this place and they start thinking doubtful thoughts. They start thinking thoughts that are not good. They start allowing the conflict to define how they think about themselves and a world around them. But what God is trying to teach us to do is to be resilient in our innovation, to be resilient in our well-digging mentality, so that when we dig deep and we work really hard and it gets robbed from us, we don't lose faith and hope just because our circumstances is that of contention and dispute. So God called Isaac to this place. That's what's really interesting. Famine led him there, but God told him to stay in Gerar. Isn't that interesting that God asked him to stay in a place that is known as dispute and contention? Isn't it interesting that God will call us to lands of dispute and contention? I found this to be really odd in my life, and it's a lesson I've learned greatly, that God doesn't call you to just lands of milk and honey, of promised land. He also calls you to lands where you're going to experience a contending over whatever work you put in. And that's peculiar to me that God would call me to that place. And I wonder sometimes, I ask God questions like, God, why did you call me to do that? It was wrought with contention. It was wrought with conflict. Why? Just why? I got a question. Why? I have all the questions. That's the Toy Story 4 line, you know, that the dinosaur asks, what's the Triceratops, right? I have all the questions. I have a question. I have all the questions. This is my wife's life mantra. She has all the questions. And usually it's smack dab in the middle of me still telling the story. I'm like, I promise that question will be answered in 6 seconds when you keep letting me tell the story. And so I have all the questions, and I have these questions. You go, why? Okay, why? Why did you even ask me to go to this place? Why didn't we just skip to, fast forward, third part of this act to where, you know, I get to go to the well where you made room for me and no one contends over it? Why did I waste time on those other wells that would be in contention? Why did I go to those places? Why did you ask me to be there? And there's something really important about what God wants to teach us. And there's this simple notion in the Bible that says the one in you is greater than he that's in the world. So when you begin to buy into this confidence that God in you is greater than any of these circumstantial things, circumstances can go awry. They can be wrought with conflict and dispute, and it doesn't change your confidence levels. This is atypical to a person whose confidence levels are determined by their circumstances. And this is feeble. This is very tenuous. This is a fragile state of confidence because circumstances will always change. Circumstances will get difficult. We all meet trials. That's biblical. So when your confidence is directly correlated to your circumstances, your confidence is going to be shot a lot. So we have to learn to shift where we get our confidence from, not from circumstances, but from God's nature. So if God is good, our confidence can come from that place. Situations aren't always good. So if our confidence comes from situations, then we're going to be shook on this lack of goodness that our situations have. So we have to take our confidence from situations and we've got to put it in God. So what does that look like? Well, we see with Isaac here, situationally, he dug 2 wells and those both came under dispute and he moved on from it. He moved on from it. What a profound lesson that not every dispute God brings you into, not every quarrel God walks you into is one that's meant for you to win. perhaps, and this is just a wild thought, perhaps God also wants to bless your enemies. Perhaps God also wants to bless those who wouldn't be blessed if it weren't for you being in their life. So sometimes God leads you into a land that will be wrought with dispute and contention, but it's for the blessings and benefit of others, and it's for the enduring character and trust you can gain in God. It looks like this. Okay, so I tried this, I did this, it prospered, taken, dispute, conflict, gone. I tried this, taken, prospered, blessed, taken, gone. Okay, well, my confidence doesn't come from the circumstance. My confidence comes from that God's going to bless me wherever I go that he says I should go. So guess what? The third well, it's going to work out. The fourth well, it's going to work out. The fifth well is going to work out. I can get 100 wells down the line and still have confidence that God's going to bless me next. So 100 wells later, I can get robbed over and over and over again. And humans can take what God blessed me in. But I can move on to the next one knowing that God's going to continue to bless me because his blessings are eternal. His blessings are never ending. His resources are more vast than that well specifically defines. So if my confidence is in God, I don't need the well. I just need God. So, like we didn't need that building, right? We didn't. If you had asked me in the middle of it, I'd be like, I need this building. But you start to grow confidence in that God has blessed us. We stay with God, and he continues to bless us. One day before we were homeless, we got in here. So the idea is real simple. In our lives, you stick with God, you trust God, and he can create new things, and he can give you new blessings, new resources, new water lines, new wealth lines. If you lose everything, that's not something that defines you for the rest of your life. Because God can recover. God could do a new thing. God's not limited to the scope of our rational brains. So when you and I lose a well that we worked hard for, whether it be in our business life, our relational life, sometimes in our spiritual life, and then people come and rob us of that thing, like truly rob us, it's something we learn that like God can do it again or he could do a new thing. So he can give me that well back, or he could let them keep it and give me 17 other new wells. Because there's no shortage of resource in God's hands. So if we truly buy into this calculus that we can let our enemies at different points have it, like Israel didn't say to Pharaoh, hey, Pharaoh, let Egypt go. This is our land, right? That was the time for them to leave and move on from that land because he was giving them a new land. So sometimes God is giving you that which your enemy has, but other times God's giving you another thing. So learn to move on. Learn to walk away. Learn to drop your pride, to drop your ego. Not every battle you're waging is meant to be won. This is a super hard lesson. Guys, this is a super hard lesson for me. I opened up this thing by saying that I like arguments. When I was in middle school, I used to just ask questions with the goal of arguing. Donovan was in middle school with me. He's a witness, right? I loved it, though. I loved probing thoughts and ideas. I loved challenging open-ended generalizations and premises. And oftentimes, my goal was definitely to find truth and deeper truth, but I loved it. I loved probing these things. So when God begins to speak, not about staying in a place of contending with the person, but moving on from it, it's like, what? I don't want that. I want to win this land. So if it was in my personality and I'm not being led by God and I was in Isaac's situation and I was just doing my will and my own emotions, I wouldn't have left when Abimelech said to leave. I would have said, I'm taking this over. Gerar is mine now. God's going to bless me to take this. Like in my own human instinct and will, I would have thought like that, right? But God doesn't always lead you to battle in a place and contend for you to then have that thing. Because God's trying to teach us something deeper than just winning a battle or winning resource. God's trying to teach us something that the resources don't really matter. Trusting in God does. Because if he can recover, if he can give you a new thing, what is the resource to him? Look what happened with Job's life. Everything gone. And then multiplied back to him the resources and things he had. This is the most important thing for us to learn when it comes to all of these things we contend and we work for. It's okay to let things go. Things that you worked hard for. I did some research on digging. Turns out it's hard. Pretty much I'm going to share some cool facts about digging. It's all kind of the same thing. It's just hard, you know? And so digging's hard, and the deeper you go, the harder it gets. The more complicated it gets. The same thing with going deep in water. The deeper you dive, the more complicated and harder it gets. Whether you have gear or no gear, turns out going deep is just hard. It's difficult. It's a challenge. So this investment of energy sometimes is really hard for us to walk away from. But we've got to learn to trust God that even when we've put our blood, sweat, and tears in something, we don't take on entitlement or a victim mindset that causes us to stay longer than we should. Man can rob, but God will bless. Man can take, God will bless. You've got to ask specific questions on how God is blessing you. Sometimes it's recovery. Sometimes it's just a new thing. Sweet. So he recognized that he'd be fruitful in the land. Verse 23 says, From there he went up to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you and will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake. So this is a promise given to Abraham, echoed to Isaac, and it happens multiple occasions. This promise this oath, this covenant is replied and echoed to Isaac again. So he built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants dug a well. So Isaac pretty much he was a blessed man, and you could see he just digs wells everywhere he goes. Did you notice this about Isaac? He's like, hey, this looks like a good spot to dig. I'm here, so we should probably dig a well. And I find this interesting about somebody who has confidence that God will bless them. They're just digging wells all the time. Everywhere they go, their effort is to go deeper, not only for their benefit, but for the benefit of everyone around them. So a blessed man, a blessed woman of God, somebody that knows God blesses them, makes good practice of digging wells everywhere they go. The restaurants you frequent, dig wells. Dig wells of relationship, dig wells of connection. In your own personal life, dig, dig, dig. In your families, dig, dig, dig. Make a habit that in all places, at all times, you're willing to go deep and you're willing to put in the work it takes to go deep relationally, emotionally, in your marriages, in your families, in your workplace, in your new vocation, in your new job. And it takes work and it takes energy, but do things that are beyond the scope of your lifetime. Do things that are beyond the scope of your current season. Establishing wells goes way beyond just needing to survive for 3 months. Digging a well is something that not only would Isaac be blessed and benefit from it and his family, but others around, even enemies and generations to come, can be blessed by the well source, the water source that he created in that time. So if we're learning from Isaac here, is that when you have confidence in God's blessing in your life, you dig wells all the time. You just dig wells all the time. So you're at this church, dig. Dig for yourself, dig for others, dig in relationship, dig in family, dig in small group. Go deep, go deep, go deep. Don't skim the surface. Skimming the surface is not the resource of blessing. We've got to see this, guys. Wells, going deep, is actually what causes communal blessing. Communities get blessed when you're willing to go deep on your own and deep for others. I'll give a personal example on this. Like my family, we have this personality thing, right? Where it's slightly addictive at times. And by slightly, I mean deeply. Vast amounts of energy that can go towards a thing that some would consider obsession. I consider it passion, you know. Somebody said the other day, hey, I got some coffee pods for you for your coffee addiction. I'm like, it's called passion. It's not addiction. I do it socially. So, but I went down this path of like for probably about 10 years, I really dove deep on trying to see this addictive thing broken in my life, right? And so initially, this is just a well being dug for myself. But what I realize is that eventually it becomes a well for others as well. And it also becomes an indicator, a sign symbolic for them to dig as well in their own life. And then our church, if you notice our church, we're not really surface dwellers. You know what I mean? We don't really stick surface. We're not like, hey, blessed and highly favored, everything glossed over, everything fake, everything religious, whitewashed tombs. If anything we might err on, if it's a whitewashed tomb, just kick down the stone and everyone's like, hey, that's ugly. But the thing is this, is that we desire true freedom. And this isn't just something that I decided for my own life. My decisions, my willingness to go deep with God had an effect on the church that I would in the future be a part of pastoring. And it wouldn't only be me, but if you look at Tim and Pam, the family and what they represent and the heart freedom and the healing and the wholeness and the freedom, it's a core value of our community. Champions of healing and freedom come to this place because they know it's real and they know what we're about because they can sense it and they can feel it and they can hear it. I don't preach fake. I don't call to fake performance stuff. I call to true freedom, and I am not the carrier of that. Jesus is the carrier of that. So when I call us to a mandate, when I call us to a thing, it's not mobilized to a man, it's mobilized to Jesus. It's mobilized to God. It's mobilized to His heart, His nature, His spirit. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And whom the Son sets free is free indeed. It should be clear that Jesus is the carrier, the harbinger of freedom. And it should be clear that this community has a deep well of desiring freedom, true freedom, because we love God and we've dug and we've contended for freedom. And when it was really hard and people came along and they buried our wells, we fought again to redig wells. And when enemies came along and put dirt over the thing, we said, you know what? We got to go back to digging those wells. And how many times in our lives do we get on a spiritual thing? And we're like, I'm crushing it right now. This is revival. And we're stoked on revival. And then all of a sudden, Jimmy comes along and craps on our life, and we're mad, and we're angry, and we're bitter. My buddy Jimmy was in the first service, and I'm like, I'm so sorry, Jimmy. How often? It's often. We're like, man, I was on such a high, man. Jimmy's the worst. And it's this Philistine thing, right? This anti-nature of God or this hateful thing. And sometimes we don't realize, but when they cover up those deep wells, when they attack and there's conflict over the deep wells, we unfortunately, and disappointingly have to pick up our shovel again and redig. Redig. If your depth has been robbed, if it's been stolen, if it's been covered up by your enemies, by those who would betray you and hurt you, dig again. Dig again. Don't make it a burial ground that you go to all the time, weeping and mourning on the depth you used to have. Move on to a new place. Stick the shovel in the ground. Pick up a little bit of dirt, a little bit of earth. And digging wells, it's so simple. It starts with one effort to pull up just a little bit of dirt. And all of a sudden, you're off. But leave the burial ground sometimes. Leave it. Leave it. Find new wells that God is doing inside of you. New ones. What does it look like? How has it changed? I spoke in somebody's first service afterwards. Minister of the gospel for like 1,000 years. A really long time, obviously not 1,000 years. But it was so cool because what he's sharing with me, he's like, man, it's not how it used to be, and I'm looking for what it's going to be now. Like, I don't know what it's going to look like. I love ministry, but it's changed, and I don't know. I don't have access in the same way I did. It's just changed, and I'm looking for what it means now. I'm looking for what it looks like. I'm like, yes, good, dig the well. kick up the earth, kick up the ground, pull up the hard, fallow ground, and allow it to deepen your character and to deepen your resolve in a way that you didn't have depth before. One thing I noticed is Isaac, from well to well to well to well to well, there's a deepening of conviction. Like, how many times did God have to say, hey, I'm blessing you? Hey, just like I blessed Abraham, I'm blessing you. Like this line, that paragraph in verse 23 about I'm going to bless you and multiply your offspring. You know how many times God said that to Abraham and his descendants? Too many. A wild amount. But what is God saying, and why is he saying it again? Because it's deepening the resolve. It's not new information. It's just deeper meaning now. It's deeper understanding. So you can tell me all day long, yeah, I've heard that scripture. I've been to church 1,000 times. I say, I don't care how many times you heard the information. I don't care how many times you've heard the worship song. Don't tell me it got old. If it got old, it means you're still in the same land you were 5 years ago. And it's time for you to go to a new land that's scary so that when somebody says God is with you, you're like, thank God, because I'm terrified. When God says to Isaac, fear not, he's not just speaking an idle word. He's telling him, fear not, because this is an option for Isaac. It's an option to fear. So when God says, fear not, he's speaking to a greater resolve in Isaac that's needed for Isaac. That you've been hitting all kinds of turmoil. You've been hitting all kinds of resistance. But don't fear. Don't do it. Don't grasp a hold of that thing. There's tons of opportunity. He was being rejected. There was failure. Fear of rejection and fear of failure are two of the three major fear groups people wrestle with. The other one is fear of pain and punishment. So if you want to know the general umbrellas of fear, fear of rejection, fear of failure, and fear of pain and punishment, Isaac got confronted with two of the major pillars of fear in one season. Hey, get out. Get out. And also, when you're trying these new wells, people are going to come along and you're going to fail. You're going to fail to keep that which you worked for. What anchors somebody in this place of rejection and failure? What carries us through? What doesn't only cause us to survive, but causes us to grow and trust God and love God more and love people around us more? What causes us to be generous and gracious in rejection? Like Isaac goes on, right? Abimelech comes back to him. He's like, hey, look, I know we kicked you out. But essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but in 26 through 31, Isaac and Abimelech actually end up making oaths and exchanging oaths in support of one another. There is this grace that is required of us that when we walk with God and we're rejected and we have to go to a new place and experience terrible things, there has to be a graciousness about us that's willing to allow those who have rejected us to be blessed as a result of our life. Here's the interesting thing you've got to understand about somebody like Isaac. They're blessed. People in the Old Testament, they understood that if you resisted a man of God that was blessed by God, it meant you were resisting God and you would have issues with God. So when Abimelech goes to him and seeks connection in an oath level, what Isaac is actually doing is being gracious to accept and or to reciprocate in that oath. Because it means that Abimelech will be blessed as a result of an oath with Isaac, a man of God that has covenant with God. So if Isaac is vindictive, Isaac is withholding that oath so Abimelech is hurt. But if you're gracious in rejection, you're willing to bless those who have spurned you. You're willing to bless those who have rejected you. This is a challenge. Who wants to bless their former employer that fired them? Who wants to bless their former friend group, their former wife or husband or spouse? Who wants to bless any of those people? Not naturally. It's by God's grace that you go through a journey where you're able to go, okay, sure, God. I mean, if that's absolutely what you want to do. If there's no other options, I thought we were in love and logic mode here, but if you're telling me this is the way, then okay, sure, that sounds good. So you see this, that there's a there's a forgiveness and there is a yieldedness to God that truly does dictate how we will relate to our environment. If you trust God, you'll have confidence to build again, to dig again. If you trust God, then you don't actually have to stay and win that battle. You can move on. Whatever loss you experience as a result, if God's leading you to move on, move on. God will bless you again. I promise you, whatever God says he will do, he will do. God is a man of his word. God of his word. He will do it. If he said he's going to do it, he will do it. Trust him. Trust him. Trust him. And you can see something really profound here, right? So he digs this well in Beersheba, and it says in verse 32, after he makes an oath and he reconciles or repairs things with Abimelech, he says, that same day Isaac's servants came and told him about the well that they had dug and said to him, we have found water. How cool is that? Right on the winds of reconciliation, there's breakthrough in Isaac's personal life and communal life. We have found water. So he called it Sheba, which resembles the word for oath or covenant. And therefore, the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. So here we see God tell Isaac to live in the land of Gerar, dispute, conflict, pilgrimage. He calls him to live in this place, and through the journey, by the end of it, he establishes a place of covenant. He establishes wells of covenant in Beersheba. So the journey is from Gerar personally to Beersheba, from dispute and conflict and God leading you through that fiery place to a place of being established in covenant and resource and prosperity. This is the cyclical journey that we'll find ourselves in. We'll find ourselves in places of failure, lying about our wife, lying to our wife, like Isaac did. Hey, this isn't my wife, it's my sister. We'll find ourselves in places of failure, and then we'll find ourselves in places of rejection, and then we'll find ourselves again in a place of failure to establish wells. And then all of a sudden, if you stay confident in what God is doing in you and through you, you'll see covenant wells established. And you'll see yourself blessed in a profound way that it will affect generations to come. Think about it. It's still called Beersheba to this day. Will you live in a way that is blessed by God, that trusts God, that generations to come will speak of the trust you had in God? Will you live in a way that I helped with the funeral yesterday, and it was one of the most profound funerals in that the way they spoke about their father as a man of God. It was so cool to see. Not a religious telling of a man's religiosity, but a true deep relationship somebody had with Jesus and the way it affected the whole family. And it was a deep well of intimacy with God that was being witnessed and reported and eulogized about a man's life. It was powerful. It was profound to hear. And what I saw is that was a generational blessing. It was the life of a man that didn't echo his deeds, but echoed his relationship with God from generation to generation. His grandkids are in the room reading scriptures, hearing about dad's or granddad's relationship with God. Not his feats, not the money he made, not the assets he collected, not the businesses he started, not the skills he had, not the climbing level he reached or the dirt biking level he reached, but the relationship with God and the trust and the love in God was what echoed to the next generation and the next generation. I believe when we actually contend for deep wells in our personal life, it affects our marriages, it affects our families, it affects our communities, our churches. All of a sudden, there's a depth of resource available. There's a depth of energy available. There's a depth of emotional support available. There's a depth of care available. Just because you can survive on surface stuff doesn't mean it's best for your life or for your family or for your community. Go deep even if it's inconvenient. Sometimes people are like, hey, I've started to go deep and now I've got more anxiety and more depression than ever. You're going to hit those pockets. You're just going to hit them. You start unpacking stuff. You start unpacking and pulling up roots of bitterness. And sometimes you get totally displaced. Look at what Isaac's journey looked like going deep. Failure, rejection, all kinds of stuff is going to happen when you choose the deep path with God. Trust him. It's okay. You're going to freak out sometimes. You're going to panic. You're going to want to hide and crawl up in a fetal position, and sometimes you're going to want to jump in the well and drown. Thank God I dug this so I can jump in. Trust God. Trust God. Trust God. God called Jesus to die on the cross. That wasn't better than before he was dying on the cross. It wasn't. Eventually, it's better for everybody. But what he endured in that moment was not better for Jesus' physical health. So trust God that what he's leading you into, the Girard places he's leading you into, are for a purpose. You might not know what that purpose is, but trust him. He's deepening your heart connection. He's deepening your convictions. He's deepening your character. He's deepening your faith. Allow him to do this work. You guys down?